So welcome here. My name's John, and this is Wendy. The university invited us to meet with you folks to talk about Steve's sudden death. After tragedy, there's often many unanswered questions, there's misinformation floating around, and there's the aftermath. People are forced to pick up the pieces. This meeting is about giving you folks a chance to talk about what happened, how are you doing, and start to explore what might be helpful as you start to move forward. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be providing some information about some common reactions after a tragedy. We're going to be looking at some resources and ways to help you move forward. Our role is to guide the process, to create a safe opportunity to have a conversation around this, provide some information, as well as I mentioned some resources. In terms of what to expect, we're going to meet for about an hour to 2 hours maximum. You'll all have the opportunity to talk if you want to. Nobody's going to be put on the hot seat. If you just want to sit back and observe, that's totally fine. One of the things I would sort of insist on is what's said here, or stays here. I'd encourage you folks to talk about your experiences, but not to be sharing what other people said within this meeting. Can we agree to that? So what's said here stays here. A couple exceptions around that if there's safety concerns. Other than that, what's said here stays here. This might not be an easy thing to talk about or to hear about. If you folks need to take a break for whatever reason, or if Wendy or I feel we need to take a break, we might call that. Key thing is just to look after yourself, not just during the meeting, but afterwards. If you do feel that you need to take a bit of a break, just a bit of a heads up, one of us will come and check in on you. So one of the things I would ask is that you don't leave the building without checking in with us. Any questions? Anything to add, Wendy?
That's great, John.
Great. I never got to meet Steve. Can you tell me what kind of guy he was? Some favorite memories you have of him?
Steve was like a nice guy. He was, he was helpful. He was one of the first friends I made when we started university together. We had our first class together. He seemed like a normal guy. He was just kind of fun to be around.
So having fun with him, like what did that actually look like?
Going out for like trivia nights at the bar. Staying in and having some beers in the room, things like that.
Nice. So he was the first guy you met. This is the guy that hung out with. We can go for beers, trivia night, and so on.
Yeah.
What about for others? How did you know him?
His room was one of the things I remember. It was full of things from his past, from his home, because he had moved here away from home to go to university. So it was a place that sort of represented Steve.
So he brought some stuff, some memento, some stuff like from the past, and brought that in there.
Yeah.
Was there anything that stood out in terms of some of that stuff that from his hometown?
I think he wasn't maybe very open about it, but I think it showed that he was connected to his community in a bit of a difficult way. He had connections to his family that mattered to him, but it was hard for him to kind of express that.
Okay, so you got that sense in terms of getting to know him, but despite some of that sort of disconnection, there was still some things that he valued, and he brought that with him.
I think so.
Nice. Anyone else in terms of how you knew Steve, or favorite thoughts or memories?
I always thought he was very inviting. He always saw the person that was a little bit not involved and invited them in and make sure that they were with the group. And
Can you share a story or example around how he invited someone in?
I remember my first year university, and I was quiet and reserved, and he saw me kind of lingering to the side and not really involved with anybody else, or not necessarily comfortable doing so, and he was the first one to kind of show me the way and gave me tours and made sure I felt comfortable.
So what was that like? So he noticed you kind of more on the outskirts, and so he approached you. What was that like for you as a new student and to have this guy come up and invite you in?
It was nice. It was comforting.
Okay. So this is the guy that you can hang out with. This is the guy that, moved, to the city for university. Sounds like a complicated relationship with his home, but there was some value within that. This is the kind of guy that was looking after others, will sort of pay attention and invite others that perhaps aren't fitting in or feeling uncomfortable to sort of create that sense of belonging. Anything else? I'm sure we can go on with this for quite a while. So how did you hear about Steve's death?
Through text message.
You got a text on that?
Mm-hmm.
What was the first thing that went through your head when you got this text?
I didn't believe it.
You didn't believe it?
I thought it was a prank.
So someone's playing a bad joke?
Mm-hmm.
I heard about it in class. Our professor announced it just before they started the lecture.
That's how you found out?
Yeah.
So you were just in class and expecting things to be business as usual, and this was how you heard?
Yeah.
I can't imagine what that would have been like. Like, what was it like for you to hear it that way?
I couldn't believe it. I thought he was just running late because we had the same class together, and then that's when the professor said that Steve had died.
Okay, so you folks talked about feeling this disbelief. This can't be happening. This is a prank. This was a shocking news. How have things been for you folks since? How has this impacted you?
It's hard to focus in class. We sat next to each other. We had the same class, and it's weird not having him there.
Mm-hmm.
This is a class that I kind of struggled with to begin with, and he was helpful, like sharing his notes and studying together and things like that. And now that he's not there, it's hard to focus in class.
It makes a lot of sense. It's hard to concentrate, and you were sitting side by side with him, so it's hard to pay attention. Have you noticed any other changes?
The other night I couldn't sleep. It just, I kept thinking about it. Was up till probably about 3 or 4 in the morning, and just couldn't sleep.
Are there folks experiencing that? It's not uncommon after a tragedy for sleep to be impacted. Have you noticed any of those differences?
Mm-hmm.
Has this impacted ways in other areas?
I often feel like I am having a hard time feeling my own emotions. I feel like my brain is wound up in this world that I'm not used to, of being anxious or sadness.
So your brain being wound up in different ways. This
Mm-hmm.
anxiousness, this sadness, this is unusual for you,
Mm-hmm.
or to this degree.
Mm-hmm.
Makes a lot of sense. And then you also said feeling, how did you put it initially? Feeling,
Like it's a different realm.
it's kind of
Kind
like
of. I wasn't prepared for it.
you weren't prepared for it. So this is something totally new. And, your brain's wound up, and this anxiousness and the sadness is one of those dominant things.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything to add to that, Laura? Can you relate to some of those experiences of sadness, difficulty sleeping, feeling anxious, can't relax your brain?
Yeah, I just keep thinking about what I could have done.
Thinking about what you could have done.
Yeah,
What do you mean?
like maybe I could have noticed that he was feeling this way, or that he was overwhelmed. I don't really understand what happened, but I just feel like maybe I could have done something.
So a sense of, questioning why this happened, not understanding it, and I could have done something. It's not uncommon after a tragedy for people to, did I miss on something? If I only could have done this, if I could have picked up on this, if I should have. Can you relate to what Laura's saying? After a tragedy, you're left with a lot of unanswered questions. And you may never have those. It's one of the things that if you would have picked up on something, would you have done something?
I don't know.
You don't know?
I don't know. I think so. I hope so.
You hope so. It's one of those things, sometimes there just isn't. And an accident's an accident. Anything else to add in terms of how this has impacted you? Welcome back. Is there anything you need from the group?
No, I'm okay.
Okay. I'm glad you took a break, and I would encourage other people to do this as well. It's kind of like sometimes we just need a breath of fresh air just to regroup. So I'm glad you joined us again. We were just talking about how people are doing after. People were talking about having difficulty sleeping, difficulty concentrating, difficulty focusing, some feelings of just extreme sadness, but also anxiousness. Can you relate to some of those?
Yeah.
Very much so. Those are often common reactions, and I'll be talking about that a little bit more in just a little bit. Oftentimes, after a tragedy, people talk about life before it and after it. It's kind of a shattering of how we see ourselves and see the world. Do you think there might be a change in terms of how you see yourself, see others, see the world around you?
I think I'm going to start paying attention more to my other friends, those who are partying heavily and excessively drinking. Checking in on them, seeing if they're okay, see if there's anything that I can help them with.
Okay. So becoming more aware of what people are doing and just kind of like some of the risks around some of that.
Yeah.
What about for others?
I feel like I'm going to be nervous about how my friends are doing, worried that something else unexpected might happen to somebody else because I didn't see this coming.
This was total blindside. So if this can happen to Steve, it can happen to anyone.
Exactly.
So more on edge and just sort of that spike in worry about others. Makes a lot of sense. Okay. Anything else? So I was wondering what's been helpful in getting through this past week and what might be helpful as you continue on?
Things like this have been helpful. Being able to talk about it. A few of our professors have been pretty relaxed when it comes to like attendance and stuff. So if you're there, it's
Mhm.
okay. If you're not, they're not gonna take it off your grade or anything like that. Moving forward, just talking about it, I guess.
So one of those things I've really found is problems love silence. So being able to connect with someone, being able to talk. Do you have someone in particular that's your go-to person?
My brother.
Your brother?
Yeah.
It's one of those things where I think those first lines of defense, friends, family, that's great. What about for others?
My friends have been very helpful.
Do you mind me asking how they've been helpful?
Just being in the same situation as others and being able to talk about how we're each doing in this same scenario, or other people feeling it the same way I am.
I often find that it's just being able to sort of see and hear from others. It kind of, I'm not the only one. This makes sense. Other people are, it kind of validates that. Nice. Anything else to add in terms of what's been helpful or not so helpful this past week and how you might sort of continue on?
I haven't really been hungry. My appetite has been pretty suppressed, but my mom has been making sure that I eat even though I don't feel like it. So she's been helpful in just making sure that my basic
Mm-hmm.
life activities are being sustained.
Makes a lot of sense for the appetite to go. When stress, some people turn to food for comfort. For others, there's just no appetite whatsoever. Oftentimes I find just considering food as fuel, even if a person's not hungry, it's kind of like, okay, I need this to go on. So your mom knows. Just out of curiosity, what is she cooking for you? Or what is she bringing for you?
Comfort food.
Comfort food.
Anything that just is, not overly flavorful necessarily, but just a wide variety of nutritional values, I guess.
Okay.
Soup,
Nice.
pasta.
Can't go wrong with that. Okay. Anything else? Okay. So what you folks were talking about, whether it's just having someone to talk to, and you mentioned your brother being so helpful, just having some friends and actually to sort of hear how they're doing emotionally, how it's impacting that you're not alone. Just that lack of appetite, but just sort of, okay, food is fuel. Those are all things that are going to be, just really important to keep in mind. After a tragedy, it's going to throw anyone for a loop. And some of those basics around just those things that are good for us, we can start to forget because we're overwhelmed. One of the things I found helpful when I've met with other groups is just to give a few handouts. You may or may not need this yourself, but I would encourage you to take one. You never know if you have a friend, someone else that's connected with Steve that might actually be able to make use of this. So I encourage you, take it and feel free to share this with other folks that you find that they might benefit. So anyways, this is just some basic do's and don'ts, and it's basic. This is common sense, but it's oftentimes when overwhelmed that common sense stuff gets thrown out the window, as I mentioned. I'd also encourage you, to reach out for additional help. Whether it's seeing a counselor, connecting with a crisis line, connecting with others. For me, we all need help at various points of our life. When we're sick, we see a doctor. When we're overwhelmed, when we're anxious, when we're sad, seeing a counselor can make a lot of sense. So just to recognize some signs that some extra help might be needed is if you continue to have strong reactions when you're feeling overwhelmed, whether this is getting in the way for long periods of time, whether it's getting to class or connecting with friends, going to work, whether you notice that things continue to get worse. If you're not looking after yourself, you mentioned right now you're not feeling hungry, you're not eating, your mom's sort of saying, wise with her to sort of, you need to eat something. But if you continue to not look after yourself over a period of time, that also might be a sign that some extra help might be needed. Or if people are worried about you. Sometimes it's hard to see it ourselves, but if other people are getting concerned. So those are some of the signs that, reaching out to a counselor might be helpful. I'm going to share some resources in just a little bit. For me, like I mentioned, we all need help at different points in our life. Seeking out that help is not a sign of weakness, it's a sign of strength. I strongly encourage you around that. So those are some thoughts around sort of as you move forward. It's interesting. I'm going to give you another handout. We were talking about some of those reactions, whether it's not being able to focus or issues around sleep or appetite. Those are all common reactions after a tragedy. So these are some other things you may or may not experience. Everyone's going to be a little bit different. But after a tragedy, some people experience a number of these types of things, and it can affect a person physically, emotionally. It can affect them physically, it can affect them behaviorally. You may experience, as I mentioned, some of these. You might see some patterns in terms of it. There might be waves where you feel it more intense. It might come and go. There might be a delayed reaction. Also on the sheet I gave you are just some resources. So if you find that you're seeing some of these patterns in yourself, things are getting worse rather than better, that it's interfering in all areas of your life, you may consider reaching out. You folks, are you familiar with the counseling resource on campus? There's some great counselors. It's a free service. There's not a wait list. I know them. They do great work. Not only that, it's confidential. I know some students have a little bit of apprehension, you know, if I go there, they're going to be talking with my professors or other people. No, what's said there stays there. There's also, I've included, for some people, yeah, even though you know it's confidential, just sort of seeing on campus may not fit for you. There's also some great community resources free of charge, so I've listed those as well. Are you familiar with the crisis lines?
Yeah.
Okay. So the crisis lines is 24/7. And what I like about the crisis lines, sometimes it can be really awkward meeting with someone in person. This is why I'm really impressed that you folks, you know, came out today. But to go into some of the stuff, sometimes it might be easier on the phone. And this is where the crisis lines can come in. Sometimes people are apprehensive around calling them. It's kind of like, well, I'm not suicidal. That's not what well, that's part of what the crisis lines are there for. But they're there for if you just need to talk about whatever. It's 2 in the morning, you can't sleep, this is going through your head, you're worrying about others, you're feeling overwhelmed, you can't get to class. This is what they're there for. So I have included that line there as well. Any other resources that you folks are familiar with that might also be helpful?
The university has a elder in residence that I can go see.
Nice.
I can get to talk to somebody.
Okay. Have you ever met with the elder?
Yeah, I met with the elder. First year, the elder came to the classroom and introduced herself and, you know, told us where they were and how they can find them and things like that.
Awesome. So that would be a resource that you would promote.
Yep.
Nice. Any others? So we're coming close to the end of the meeting. I was just kind of wondering, do you folks have any final thoughts or questions or comments?
No.
All right. I want to thank you for coming out today. This couldn't have been an easy thing, but I think it's an important thing. The key thing that I've learned is problems of silence and problems love isolation. Health is in connection. And I think you said it best, Jesse, just hearing from people around them going through similar things, there's some comfort in that. I'm not alone within that. And how you had mentioned just being able to talk about this, just getting some of this stuff out, there's that sense of connection around that. So this is important. So I would encourage you folks to continue to talk with each other, support each other, and reach out to those folks around you. So as we sort of end, I just wanted to let you know that both Wendy and I will be kicking around for the next little bit if you want to meet with us one-on-one. If not, I wish you folks well. Thank you for coming out.
Yes, I have a paper to write.
A paper to,
I have a last course,
Okay.
yes.
John, did you have a minute to talk?
Definitely. Grab a seat. What's up?